whatever diet you're following, whatever training protocol regimen you're following, if you adhere to it, you can feel confident in that, knowing that you've got something good going for you that day, no matter how bad everything else is going. If you have that one solid thing, then it's easier to keep going forward with that momentum and let that build upon. And then just the simple aspect of learning more about consistency, learning more about discipline, learning more about patience. I mean, natural bodybuilding is not a young man's sport. I mean, most people that excel in it are older than not, because it takes time to build muscle. So you learn these aspects of patience. You learn these aspects of dedicated discipline and consistency. And that crosses into business. I'm a better businessman because of my past in bodybuilding. I'm a better husband to my wife because of bodybuilding. I hope to be a better father to my future son because of what I've learned in bodybuilding. And probably all this can be said about business too. I mean, you own a business as well. A lot of these same character traits are developed through being an entrepreneur, but bodybuilding and just simply strength training and being on top of nutrition is a great gateway for it all as well.
Love it, man.
What's going on, y'all? Robert Sikes, KetoSavage.com. I'm a lifetime natural competitive bodybuilder. On Ever4 Radio today, we dive into how the ketogenic diet has totally transformed my life from a competitive bodybuilding standpoint, but then also spilled over into other areas of my life, such as my relationships, my entrepreneurial journey, my business, and my life in its totality to improve all aspects of it. So hopefully you learned something. Hope you enjoy. See you there.
3, 2, 1.
Well, I mean, hey, speaking of the keto lifestyle, we got Mr. Keto Savage himself on the show. Robert, welcome, man.
Hey, man, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I got to say, I've been really liking the way that keto has been progressing in the health fitness optimization space, because now I can kind of reap the benefits with some of these supplements, some of these, modalities without needing to go full keto. And I say that because I've done full keto in the past, and my body, it's just not for me. But I'm liking where we are now in the world to where I can kind of reap the benefits when I want.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to, say it's for everybody by any means. I've been doing it for 7 years now straight. So it's definitely for me, but I don't want to ever become dogmatic about it by any means.
I mean, you're someone that definitely knows what works for you and what doesn't. And you've got a hell of a backstory with kind of just, air quote here, doing all the right things, but so much of your life, so much of your health, your mental health, performance, cognition, all that was kind of not playing catch up with the physical self. So can you kind of take us back to that moment when you realized, all right, my physical training is on point, I'm getting these results that I love, but kind of just everything else is really falling by the wayside?
Yeah. So I got into bodybuilding when I was a junior in high school, and I was doing the traditional bro dieting approach, eating 6-7 meals a day, 2 or 3 hours between meals, chicken, rice, broccoli kind of deal. And I did competitions. I got lean. I won my shows. But then after that first show, I kind of spiraled out of control and developed a bunch of disordered eating tendencies. And that just kind of took a toll on me mentally. I was also struggling with really bad obsessive compulsive disorder throughout all of that. So it was just kind of a perfect storm. And then I kind of fell into keto by accident in 2015. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was a hormonal situation or what, but that seemed to streamline everything from the food standpoint. And then that had a corresponding positive effect on just my psychological outlook towards everything, which then worked in tandem with all of my business endeavors and just, focusing and having more mental clarity and just being more productive throughout the day.
What do you mean by accident? You're like, oh, whoops, I slipped and fell into ketosis.
Yeah. So after my first show, which was in 2012, if I remember correctly, I bulked up to like 230 pounds for that show. And then I gave myself 12 weeks to lean out, and I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks. This was all before keto.
Wow.
And it was not healthy. It wasn't good. I lost a lot of muscle in the process. But then after that show was over, I didn't have any type of, direction towards reverse dieting or the importance of that. So I just started eating everything in sight. That's when my binging tendencies kind of came into play. I bulked up, or I gained like 20 pounds in 24 hours after that first show. And I just knew that something had to change because that wasn't a sustainable trajectory for me. So I started dabbling in a bunch of different types of diets, and I found one called carbohydrate backloading, which was developed by John Kiefer. And basically that's ketogenic diet during the day, and then a bunch of high glycemic index carbs at night. that worked out well for me. But at some point I realized that eating a bunch of, brownies covered in syrup and peanut butter at night probably wasn't optimal long term. So I wound up skipping out on the carbohydrates and did carb backloading without the carbs. And lo and behold, that was pretty much keto. And that's when there started to become more information around keto. That was before there was any podcast or blogs or anything. But I think I heard a podcast with Dom D'Agostino and Tim Ferriss way back then. And that was kind of what sparked my interest in the diet. And then I haven't really looked back since.
That reminds me, I think it's the same approach that Corey Matthews, the old Muscle Farm guy, that reminds me of a dietary approach he had, where, he was up in early training. I think like 4 a.m. was his thing, but he would do that at night. He would just basically, right before we go to bed, he would load up like shit ton of fruit, a lot of, carbs, just get that blood sugar spike. So basically when he would wake up at 3:30, 4 a.m. to go train, he was in like peak, like just saturated, ready to go with all those carbs.
Yeah. I think, with keto, especially being fat digesting much more slowly than carbs and protein, like having a large bolus meal the night before and that basically acting as your pre-workout meal the next day seems to work well for a lot of people. They don't have near the digestive upset going into the gym. So it just kind of becomes more pleasant in that regard. So I've kind of stuck with that. I typically train in the morning fasted as well.
How have you seen the ketogenic diet, the ketogenic lifestyle, this, approach to eating, training, everything? How have you seen it change over the years, and how have you changed around it?
It's an interesting question, man. There's a lot of controversy around that right now. So like when I got into it in 2015, yeah, keto itself has been used for forever. It was developed, it's been around in our evolutionary past since the dawn of, humankind. But then it started becoming pretty prominent in the 1920s for use with epileptic children that were having seizures.
Oh, that's right.
And then in 2015 is when I started it. And at that time, there wasn't really any books or blogs or podcasts or anything. There wasn't any products out there that were marketed towards keto. And then I think in like 2017, 2018 is when it really spiked. And if you look at Google Trends, that's when it really kind of reached its zenith. And then since then, there's been this massive influx of products and just marketing around the ketogenic diet, hailing it as this miracle weight loss diet that's, so there's some truth in some of that marketing, but a lot of it's been overly hyped for sure. So I got into it before any of that came around and kind of, planted my flag in the ground and said, look, this is working really well for me. I'm gonna start putting out content around this. And now it's kind of become a lot more marketed. And it's interesting, man. You see people move into the nutrition space, into the ketogenic diet space, put out a whole bunch of content, build a brand around it. And then as keto's kind of fallen in popularity, they just move on to the next thing. So it's no longer the hype that it was a few years back, but there's more science, more medical research coming out daily with the benefits of a ketogenic diet. So I feel like it'll stand the test of time long term, but it's not in its glory days that it was a few years ago.
Why do you think that is? Because in my opinion, and again, like I've done the ketogenic diet just to test it out, several years ago, and it just wasn't for me. I wasn't getting a lot of like the leaning out. I wasn't getting a lot of the cognition. I wasn't getting a lot of the things that it seemed a lot of people were. So that just told me, my body is not adapting well to ketogenic diet. So let's move on. But I feel like people, when they do keto, they kind of really go all in because they get such amazing results and kind of get dogmatic about it. Like, why would I ever want to do anything else? It's working for me pretty quickly. People get pretty quick results, in my opinion. And then they're able to keep those results, maintain that level of body composition, strength, optimization, performance. But just because it's becoming less popular, you're saying that people are actually jumping ship. Why do you think that is? If it was giving them such incredible results, but just because it's not popular now, why aren't they keeping it?
I think a lot of people just coming into it for the wrong reasons to begin with. A lot of people that were already healthy jumped on the keto bandwagon and tried to kind of leverage the hype that was keto. And now that something else has come along, like metabolic flexibility or intermittent fasting or carnivore, there's more opportunity to build a brand there. So they'll jump ship and kind of move that direction. And that's fine. That's just kind of the nature of the beast with anything that's in popular limelight. For me, like I've always been passionate about the ketogenic diet because it helped me get my life back. It helped me kind of remove my disordered eating tendencies. It improved my health, improved my psychology towards food. And I've been able to help a lot of people emulate that same thing. So I'm bought in for the long term. I'm fine putting out content around keto, even if it's getting half the views that it was back in the day, because I never started putting out content simply to to get views in the first place. Like I wanted to make a difference. And for people that are still doing it the right way, they're still seeing that positive benefit. And the people that have totally transformed their health with the ketogenic diet, like they're pretty bought into it. They're not trying to jump ship and move on to something else. So I'm speaking to that audience.
Take me back to what you said about your psychological approach to food, the psychology of food and the psychology of what you're eating, how you're eating it, when you're eating it, why. That's a unique aspect that I think a lot of people don't get, unfortunately. They might just stay latched onto a physical result, but I'm hearing that actually kind of flips a switch for you mentally. Can you expand on that for us?
Yeah. So when I was, pre-keto, when I was eating and doing like all the traditional bro diets, like eating every 2 or 3 hours, eating a certain amount of protein, eating very minimal dietary fat, a lot of carbohydrates, there's just a lot of physiological things that happen with that. I mean, like when I'm doing a prep back then and I'm taking in 30 grams of fat a day, like my hormones take a hit, my leptin and ghrelin tumbles. After the show's over, I'm eating everything in sight that I feel deprived of. That's when I, start having these binging tendencies. And this is super common amongst competitors, like, competitors as well. I mean, this is probably more
Everybody
common.
does it. The second they step off stage. Yeah. It's just,
yeah, and that has a really negative connotation long-term with their psychology towards food, because they feel like they're deprived and depleted because they go through several months of prep and they restrict so much. And then when that finish line's crossed, they don't have any way of intelligently moderating that, because they're just kind of at the whims of whatever they're craving and they give into those whims. With what I've found personally via a ketogenic approach, since I don't have that crazy glucose rush that comes from eating a bunch of carbohydrates, I don't have near the insulin spike and dip that accompanies that either. So I pretty much just eat more food post show, but it's all coming from the same quality foods that I was eating throughout my prep, which is just the quality meats and, proteins and fats. And with that, there's much less binging tendency that takes place. So I no longer become a slave to the food. I no longer feel like it's in control and not me. And because I don't have that, control of the food, I'm much more liberated in the sense that I can focus on what I choose to focus on, and I'm liberated by that. And I'm just more productive throughout the day. And it's honestly more sustainable. Like any diet can be effective. I mean, I don't want to say that the ketogenic diet is the only diet for anybody by any means, but once you do things that are in that extreme, like competition prep is, and you find that this is a sustainable approach that keeps you in control post competition, that to me has a pretty long lasting effect.
Liberation is a pretty amazing side effect of these goals we set before ourselves, man. I hope that a lot of people pick up on that, because if you can note the psychological, the mental, the emotional changes and hopefully benefits of maybe what you're doing physiologically, that should kind of tell you, hey, I'm onto something for me. I'm onto something for more than just maybe stepping onto the stage or slimming down or bulking up or whatever you want to do. You're actually having a mental change state. And that, like you said, is really, I think, the secret sauce for sustainability when it comes to a diet.
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate right now about are carbohydrates, are sugars truly addicting? Like there's studies that show that the brain lights up similarly to a cocaine addict when they eat a bunch of sugar. So there's a pretty good argument to be made for certain foods being addictive in nature. I suppose anything can be addictive in nature depending on the person, but I don't know of a whole lot of people that are addicted to ribeyes or addicted to, eggs, but I know a lot of people that are addicted to carbohydrates or sugar. So when you remove that from the equation, but yet give them the hope that, hey, look, you can still perform at an elite level in the absence of carbohydrates, they don't feel like they're deprived or depleting themselves of anything that's necessary for excelling. And I kind of want to be a light in that regard for people in the natural bodybuilding realm.
What about longevity? I think there's a lot to be said for a specific and unique dietary approach to give you specific physiological results. But long term, what have you studied? What have you seen maybe in your own health, your own labs with metabolic health? This has been something really on the radar for me the last 1 to 2 years. And, I'm not wearing it now, but I go through cycles of a continuous glucose monitor because I've been really intrigued by this concept of the more and more we're learning about metabolic health and how what might cause a huge spike for me doesn't for you. And it might not change me physiologically or in terms of what I see in body composition and maybe even performance. But we do know that these spikes over time are damaging metabolic health and can long-term cause a lot of inflammation and can lead to things such as type 2 diabetes, and other inflammatory responses in the body. Have you seen that happen in your case? Have you seen maybe your metabolic health really level out, or where do you kind of stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking in terms of, glucose fluctuations, that typically goes by the wayside once you adopt a ketogenic diet. I mean, I've gone through periods of wearing a CGM as well, and I'm typically within the 70s, 80s milligrams per deciliter. When I've done an extended fast in the past, it's gone as low as I think 33, which is kind of crazy to see.
Somebody
my
get the paddles, he's dead.
Oh, yeah, I felt great. That's the crazy thing. Like whenever I don't do extended fasting very often, but I've done it in the past. And when I've done it, my glucose just drops, man, but I feel great. But yeah, all my markers for inflammation have improved. Like my C-reactive proteins improved, my hormone markers have improved. I get a lipid panel every year as well, and that's like a lot of people are concerned with lipids on a ketogenic or high-fat diet. But all my markers have stayed in healthy ranges. My HDL has increased, my LDL has stayed in a healthy range, and my trigs have dropped dramatically. So as long as you're tracking these metrics and being cognizant of what they are and how they're changing, then you should be able to keep things within a range that's healthy. There's a lot of studies out there, and one of my biggest frustrations right now are a lot of these studies out there, because I'm a huge advocate for learning the studies, diving into the research, seeing what the science shows, but then also taking things with a grain of salt and realizing that how you feel and how you're performing, what your markers are, is super important. Because anybody can cherry pick a study and say, hey, look, this proves my case. But then for every study that says one thing, there's another study that says the exact opposite. So you can't give it all the weight in the world. You kind of have to just look at how you're personally feeling and responding as well.
How would you go about advising somebody to be a study of one? A concept we talk a lot about here on the show, particularly through the lens of the ketogenic diet. How would you advise somebody to get started, to test out if this is actually for them in terms of how they look, how they feel, how they perform, maybe even if they want to get some before and after metabolic panels?
Yeah, I mean, probably similarly to how I would advise anybody to test any diet. Get some baseline panels done, get some initial progress pictures, get some measurements, get like a DEXA scan, see what your composition is comprised of, and then give it a good solid 3 to 6 months. A lot of people do the ketogenic diet for a few weeks. They'll drop some initial water weight. They'll flush out all that glycogen and the water that is held by it. And then they'll plateau because they're not mitigating or moderating anything else. You still got to manipulate your nutrition, your calories, all that stuff is in a state of flux depending on your goals. But if you're tracking that and making conscious manipulations and tracking how your body responds to that, you'll be able to gain a pretty good feel for if it's a positive response or a negative response. Like whenever I'm doing a prep, I track everything. I track every gram that I'm consuming. I track all my weight, my measurements, my body composition. I'll sometimes, go super granular and track changes in ketone levels and blood glucose, and obviously my body composition. And then I've got a very specific goal in mind with a prep, and I get to that lean level, but I can't sustain that indefinitely. But if I'm tracking these metrics at the onset, at the halfway point, at the end, and then once I reverse that and go back to a sustainable intake and everything's in a healthy range, then I can be pretty confident that my body's responding favorably to it.
You kind of went into it there a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, you said a key word when we're looking at dieting and our diet, and particularly when it comes to changing body composition, tracking. Mm-hmm. The T word, the dreaded T word. Everybody, I think, who walks the line of any particular diet, will kind of fight you tooth and nail. You got to track. You can't manage what you don't measure. Aside from maybe intuitive dieting, flexible dieting, just, and plus people after a certain point, you have a much greater sense of awareness of total calories. Have I hit my protein, vegetables, all that stuff for the day? What role does tracking play in your daily life that is perhaps unique to the ketogenic diet that someone else might not have?
So when I'm in a prep, I'm tracking everything. Like everything is getting measured. Everything's getting managed. I'm changing macros every single week by 5 or 10 gram increments. So nothing drastic, but still subtle. And I'm tracking those changes as I change my nutrition throughout the week. When I'm in an off season, like I am now, I'm more concerned to just make sure I'm getting enough total calories in and enough protein in, and then I'm implementing progressive overload in my training. But I don't track everything to a T macro wise in my off season, because I feel like if I was going to track indefinitely 365 days a year, it would get kind of exhausting. And some people that works great for them. But for me personally, I like to have a little bit of a disconnect. So I make that disconnect in the off season, so that when I go back into a prep, I'm able to be as strict and adherent as possible, because I've had that time away from it, so that I'm able to go full force into it when the time comes.
How do you maintain this diet? Because it sounds like, you have been doing it for a long time, and this is a part of your lifestyle now. How do you maintain a ketogenic lifestyle outside of your own home, outside of your own business, when maybe, options aren't as well known ahead of time for you? How do you keep that up, man?
Honestly, man, at this point, having done it for 7 years now, it's just easy. Like I don't even have to think about it. Any restaurant I go to, I can find a way to eat certain foods or remove certain foods from the plate to make it ketogenic in nature. I don't really go to many pasta restaurants, but if I were to, I'd get like a salad with some chicken or something.
Yeah.
You make it work. Like you can just find ways to make it work. One thing I don't really tolerate is excuses, and I work with clients, and I hear all of their excuses, which just ingrains in me all the more to not make those same excuses myself. And like when you're traveling, when you're on the road, when you're eating out, I mean, you can certainly make it work. You may not be able to track it as accurately. So I don't really do that when I'm in a, really strict phase of a competition prep, but just in a sustainable day-to-day lifestyle standpoint, you can totally make a ketogenic diet work wherever you're at, whenever, without too much trouble.
Is there anyone off the top of your head that you would advise probably keto is not the best dietary approach for you, and why?
There are some people that have familial hypercholesterolemia, which in that situation, they may not be able to tolerate the higher lipid content of their foods as well. So that would be a case scenario that may not be optimal for them. But honestly, the only way to know is to test that and to get those markers. And honestly, just to see how you feel. Like a lot of people do keto and they do it incorrectly at the onset and they don't feel well. And they just assume that it's not going to work for them. There's a lot of common mistakes people make when first adopting the diet, simply like not drinking enough water intake, not taking in enough sodium and potassium. A lot of people experience, keto flu, air quotes on that one. And that's mostly just a result of not taking in adequate electrolytes, because when you switch over to a ketogenic diet, you stop consuming carbohydrates, your body flushes out that glycogen in the water that it's held by, then you're going to flush out all your electrolytes as well. Your kidney's going to flush out your sodium and potassium. So a lot of people are deficient in sodium and potassium. If they start supplementing that once adopting a ketogenic diet, that typically hedges against all the adverse effects there in the interim.
You hit on a really key concept there. I'm glad you brought it up. Electrolytes in general, regardless of the diet that you're on, the vast majority of Americans, I believe, vast majority of a lot of us humans are deficient in these key electrolytes because there are things other than water that we are sweating out, that are being evaporated out of our breath when we're traveling. Just, the lack of moisture in the air changes that ratio for a lot of us of sodium, potassium, magnesium, these kind of three main electrolytes. What role do these play in our daily living? What role do they play in our ability to maintain strength, endurance, stamina, energy? And how do you kind of make sure that you're staying on top of those electrolytes?
Man, they're huge. I mean, you can't take them for granted. I mean, you probably don't need to supplement as much if you're eating more carbohydrates, because your body's not going to be excreting as much, more than likely. But everybody needs to make sure they're taking in ample electrolytes. And most of the electrolyte marketed products like the Powerades and Gatorades out there contain hardly any amounts. I mean, not even worth
sugar water. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not even worth mentioning. I mean, everything in the body is electric. Everything in the brain is electric. Everything in the muscular contraction is electric. Your ability to get a great pump and blood flow while training is going to be dependent upon proper hydration and electrolyte levels. Your ability to focus and recover is going to be dependent upon proper electrolyte levels. When I'm peaking for a show, I can totally change the way I look based off of what I'm doing with my sodium and potassium intake. So for me, with the ketogenic diets, I found that a supplemental intake of about 2-to-1 ratio between sodium to potassium works well for most people. There's some potassium in the meats you're consuming, and like avocado, for instance, has quite a bit of potassium. If you're supplementing about a 2-to-1 ratio, which for most people following a keto diet, they can start with a baseline of about 4,000 milligrams of sodium, 2,000 milligrams of potassium, and half a gallon to a gallon of water. That's a pretty good ratio for most people to start with, and they can just scale up from there as needed.
Clearly very knowledgeable. And no doubt a lot of this knowledge and experience and research poured into your latest baby. Well, you have a real baby coming, but your new book, man. What was unique to you? What stood out to you? Maybe something new or a friendly reminder about the ketogenic diet, and maybe, even just the human body and how amazing it is that we have the ability to manipulate it like we do. We just choose and we can change it. What experience was unique for you in writing this book, and how did it kind of manifest itself in your writing?
Yeah, so I mean, the book is basically a step-by-step guide for optimizing your physique for a natural bodybuilding competition via the ketogenic diet and lifestyle. And for me, bodybuilding in itself is more of a mental sport than a physical one. I mean, you're totally transforming your body, but it's like bodybuilding is a strange sport, man. Like it's not like it's
to say the least.
incredibly, yeah. I mean, when you look at any aspect of it acutely, like a really intense training session or hitting your macros for a day, like none of it's really hard. I mean, anybody can do those things. The hard part comes by doing it every single day for 4 to 6 months at a time without fail, no matter what. And that is something that I fell in love with when I did my first show, because afterwards, once I experienced that success by doing something which was the epitome of dedication and discipline in my mind, everything else transformed for the better, like my business, my relationships, my life in its entirety. So the book is kind of a manifestation of the technical aspects of bodybuilding with a ketogenic approach, but I include a ton of mindset talk in the book, growth mindset, mentality. I include my own personal story. It's kind of like a memoir. And basically it's designed to just give people some perspective as to what they may be experiencing throughout these different phases of a prep, but then give them the tools to apply those principles into other areas of their life outside the prep. I'm a big advocate for having the right mentality going into a prep, going into any hard thing for that matter. And bodybuilding for me is like a perfect illustration of leveraging this adversity, leveraging this hardship to become better for it in the end. And if we're honest with ourselves, we live in a pretty plush era. I mean, most of us aren't waking up wondering if we're going to make it to the end of the day, if we're going to survive. So bodybuilding kind of acts as a self-imposed hardship where you can have these sacrifices. You can experience this sensation of going without and then become stronger for it. So that's kind of what I wanted the book and, my philosophy towards it to embody.
Hell of a philosophy, man. And you bring up one of my favorite points about, excuse me, I say fitness is the best gateway drug. When we begin to see and feel results in whatever training modality we choose, health, that's just taking a walk or being a competitive bodybuilder, and then you add on to it the ability to manipulate your diet, you become more aware of the diet, you choose what you put into your body so you can feel your best, look your best. The spillover effect that this has into life, into business, into relationships is like what I wish we would be taught this at the beginning, other than, hey, here's how to, increase your delt. Here's how to improve your deadlift by 100 pounds. Say, hey, here's how you're going to feel showing up to work. Here's how the people in your life are going to maybe look at you differently, and you're going to improve the quality of relationships. Can you go a little bit deeper for us there, man? Like this spillover effect of seeing and feeling your best, or even just seeing yourself and feeling yourself a little bit better than the day before, that spillover effect in these other areas of life, like how invaluable is that?
I mean, honestly, I think it gives you a solid foothold. So there's been times in my life where I've had everything going, the wrong way. Like I've been in very dark times. But if I've maintained my nutrition, if I've maintained my consistency with the gym, that all gives me a solid foothold to crawl out of that hell that I've, dug for myself. And once you have that solid foothold, you can't ever be totally buried. And I feel like, whatever diet you're following, whatever training protocol regimen you're following, if you adhere to it, you can feel confident in that, knowing that you've got something good going for you that day, no matter how bad everything else is going. If you have that one solid thing, then it's easier to keep going forward with that momentum and let that build upon. And then just the simple aspect of learning more about consistency, learning more about discipline, learning more about patience. I mean, natural bodybuilding is not a young man's sport. I mean, most people that excel in it are older than not, because it takes time to build muscle. So you learn these aspects of patience. You learn these aspects of dedicated discipline and consistency. And that crosses into business. I'm a better businessman because of my past in bodybuilding. I'm a better husband to my wife because of bodybuilding. I hope to be a better father to my future son because of what I've learned in bodybuilding. And probably all this can be said about business too. I mean, you own a business as well. A lot of these same character traits are developed through being an entrepreneur, but bodybuilding and just simply strength training and being on top of nutrition is a great gateway for it all as well. Love
it, man. Love it. I want to pick your brain a little bit more before we kind of get towards the end here. We're talking earlier about how you've seen and you've been through this change, the ups and the downs and the popularity and the maybe not so popular aspects of the ketogenic diet. And I think you're talking about a bigger concept here. In the health, fitness, wellness space, especially the last, we'll say 8 years, maybe even 10, with social media and the ability that we have to shine a light and to become trending about certain things and certain modalities, diet, training, whatever. I think that things get tainted and people latch onto things for right reasons in the beginning. And like you were saying before, they might become the wrong reasons or non-sustainable reasons. Keto aside, what's your personal take on the health and fitness industry as we've kind of seen it go up and down the last several years through social media? What are we doing right and where do we have room to grow?
Man, it's a freaking warfare out there, man. Like there's so many sub niches and groups, and it's like, and I see and it breaks my heart, man. Like it really does. Because I think at the end of the day, everybody's goals are more or less aligned. Like I've had vegans on my podcast that are total stark contrast to my beliefs, but at the end of the day, they just simply want to save the planet, be healthy, and help other people be healthy, which is pretty much what I'm wanting to do.
Great goal.
So like there's a lot more common ground than not, but we all come to it from totally different backgrounds, from belief systems. And because of that difference, it pits people against one another. Like people are just at each other's throats, man. And I see, with social media, with this mentality of being a keyboard warrior, people are saying things that they would never say if they were sitting across the table from somebody looking them in the eye, face to face. And I feel like you never want to sacrifice your integrity for any messaging that you put forth. And I see a lot of that happening right now. I see a lot of people just tearing people down. And I don't know where I heard this quote, but there's two ways to have the tallest skyscraper in a city. And that is one, to build the tallest skyscraper in the city, or to tear everybody else's down. And I see so many people going for this destructive approach. And I've always just wanted to steer clear from that. I mean, there's a great people out there. And, right now the hypes are such that people kind of gravitate towards negativity. Like if you have some bad news on one hand and good news on the other hand, people tend to steer and focus on the bad news, which I don't like. That's human nature for whatever reason. But I'm fine sacrificing a larger following or leaving some money on the table if I never have to sacrifice my integrity and just continue to do what I know in my heart of hearts to be right and pure and true. And I feel like if everybody adopted that and kind of cared more for the whole and what the big picture goal was, it would be a lot more pleasant online for sure.
It reminds me of a phrase I've shared many times. And I had a commander in my first duty station in the Army that anytime we would have a safety brief before like a long holiday weekend, before he would basically release the unit to go run amok in town, basically, he would just say, it's all about choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. And that always just kept me grounded. And so I think that really sums up pretty well what you're talking about there, man.
Yeah, 100%. I love that.
Which really brings me to the final question. I think is a great segue into what I mean when I'm talking about moving forward in life, living a life ever forward. It is that choosing the hard right over the easy wrong in your own life, whatever that means to you. But what does it mean to you, Robert, ever forward? How does that land on you here today?
Man, I've got, like we all have our brands. I like your brand, I like the concept ever forward, because it's not something you really paint into a corner and say, hey, look, this guy is a fitness guy. This guy's a nutrition guy. This guy's a business guy. Like it's all,
who is this guy?
And like for me personally, like I've kind of built this entity and this brand around Keto Savage, and I went ultra niche with that. But we've got, like, I'm a lot more than just the food that I eat. I've got a lot more to my life that oftentimes doesn't get told. But I'm building out a sub brand, and it's going to be called Live Savage. And it's all about like these 5 primary pillars that I feel sum up all the importance in life and kind of branch out from there. But I look at what I want to accomplish with this Live Savage brand, and I look at how there's a lot of similarities and common ground with your concept of ever forward, or what I think your concept of ever forward is. So if I was to define it, man, it's just simply always putting your best foot forward, always being the better version of yourself. Because we all know inherently right and wrong. We all know when we're going through life, what is the right decision? What is the wrong decision? We oftentimes make that wrong decision, but we all inherently know generally what's the right one. And I feel like if you're putting your best foot forward, if you're trying to help your fellow man, fellow woman, and maintain your integrity throughout the process, never stab people in the back, and just simply be the best version of yourself possible in a way that adds more value than you take with your time on earth, with life being as short as it is. I mean, the brevity of life is nothing to scoff at. So making the most of your time here, I mean, that's what it is, man. That's how I would define what I'm wanting to do with Live Savage, what I would define as ever forward, and just constantly getting better every single day that passes, man.
Beautiful answer. Thank you so much. And I remember when we first connected for when I was on your show, I was just like, you know what? I'm always reminded of how cool my other fellow Southern gentlemen are out there, man. So you've got a great approach, great philosophy to life. It reminds me a lot of home. And so I appreciate you, man. You got a great head on your shoulders. Congratulations on the new book. Congratulations on the bun in the oven there. What you guys are due really soon, right?
Yeah, May 4th. So it's kind of crazy, man.
Like literally a month from now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Shit, man. Well, Robert, thank you so much, man.
Hey, appreciate you, brother. Thanks for the opportunity, and keep making a difference like you are, man.
I'll try.